Now we come to another part of our show that has become very popular for many investors. They like the top three. We always have a top three list of things I think individuals should consider before they make their investment decisions. First one, as you can see here, seasonal factors. What do I mean by that? Well, this time of year, markets tend to be a little bit soft. Why? Well, one big reason is there's nobody around. How many people do you know are on vacation, either outside the country, outside the city, up at their cottage? How many people are just taking days off, not coming into the office? Quite a few. And so trading volumes are at the lowest that they are for the year. This time of the year, trading volumes, the amount of trades going through the TSX, New York markets, are at their low point. So if there is a big headline that comes through and a bunch of investors move in one direction, they can really move the market in that direction because there's not a lot of trading going out there to counterbalance that movement. So seasonal factors, this time of year, August and into September, tend to not be the best months of the year. Even beginning of October tends to be a bit soft as well. We'll talk a bit about that. Nvidia, they're about to report earnings August the 28th. They are the last Mag 7, the Mag 7, Magnificent 7 to big cap tech stocks, as we talk about. They're the last to report. And obviously a huge market mover. Nvidia, one of the largest companies in the world, largest chip maker in the world, with dominating artificial intelligence, over 90% of the market with their chips. What are they going to say? Can they continue to grow at a pace that the market would be happy with? Last time they reported, they had a 200% growth rate. That is just unbelievable. Can they maintain that growth rate? I'm a little nervous. I'm not so sure they can. And if they don't, what if they only grow by 100%? Still a fantastic number. But the market may say, well, maybe that last number, the one before this one, was as good as it gets. And now we have to reevaluate what Nvidia is doing. So we'll talk about Nvidia. And the third point, bank earnings, Canadian bank earnings. And I bring this up because as investors in Canada, many of us own the Canadian banks. What do I expect? And what should we be looking for? So let's take our first one, which is seasonal factors. And our first chart kind of shows it best. We have a chart here, and it not only is it going to show us seasonal factors or the months of the year, which is what we have, but it's also going to show it in a presidential cycle. So the fourth year of a presidential term, which we know we're in. We're going to have a U.S. election in November. And you can see here how the months fare. Normally, August is a bit of a soft month, but in a presidential election year, August tends to do well. And we're seeing that this year as well. This month of August, even though it started soft and difficult, but has now picked up steam and it has been doing phenomenally well. Markets are doing great on both sides of the border, Canada and the U.S. But this is where I start to get nervous. Let's take a look at September. Now in September, historically, even if it's not an election year, September is a bit of a struggle. It is the worst performing month of the year. Now, does that mean that all of us should sell our investments and get out of the market for the month of September? Absolutely not. Because obviously you never know what this year brings. As I said, normally August is a difficult month, but here we have August doing well. September, as you can see here, negative 0.46%, followed by October, negative 0.34%. And then as you get closer to the election, November does well, and December does well as well. So these are kind of the seasonal factors. And when you look at September, what's happening in September? Well, you're going to have an interest rate decision. And let's go to the next chart here on interest rates and what the market does when you get an interest rate cut out of the Fed. You can see here that when you get an interest rate cut from the Fed, which is your purple line, what happens to the S&P 500? So just before 2010, so 2008 or so, you had a cut and the markets fell. Then moving forward to the next time the Fed cut, back, I guess, 2021 or so, market fell. There you have twice where the market has fallen, just the two examples. But I think this could be a third one in the month of September coming up. Why do I think that? Because it's one of those things where the market has already priced in a Fed cut of at least 25 basis points. So if we get 25 basis points, I think investors are going to say, okay, well, tell me something I didn't know. We're going to sell the news, even though investors bought into the rumor of the cut. So they're going to sell the news or buy the rumor, then sell the news. And I think the market could have a bit of a sell-off in and around when the Fed cuts rates in September. Obviously, there are no guarantees, but I think it is a possibility. So if it happens, obviously we should be prepared. Again, maybe look at an opportunity to make a buy, take advantage of a dip, because I think the rest of the month, or maybe even the rest of the year, will be quite strong. So seasonally, I think September is weak. We could have some weakness. We have an interest rate, an announcement by the Fed, by the Bank of Canada. Bank of Canada doesn't mean as much for the markets as the Fed does. If they cut, we could see a bit of a, maybe a bit of a disappointment. If they cut more than 25 basis points, well, maybe that may strike a little fear in the markets, or maybe the markets will even like that because they're not expecting it, and maybe the market moves higher. So we'll have to see what happens, but just be mindful that seasonality is something that individual investors should have on their minds at this time. Second point, Nvidia earnings. I think we all need to pay attention to Nvidia earnings. It has become one of the largest companies in the world. I think they're still the third largest company in the world, although they're gaining on Apple and Microsoft. Apple being the largest, Microsoft in the 2 spot right now. What I've called many times the $3 trillion trio, right? $3 trillion in market cap for Apple, Microsoft, and Nvidia. And Nvidia has done just phenomenally well in the last little while. Let's take a look at a chart of Nvidia. You can see here the amount of gains that we've seen when I guess that long weekend in August, when it was a long weekend here, when the Dow dropped over 1,000 points, Nvidia touched a low point under $100 a share. It had been as high as 140, went down below 100. And looking back, what a buying opportunity that would have been. And today, sits in and around $128, in and around 130, let's call it. They're about to report earnings in the next week or so, and it's going to be a big market mover. The next chart or information piece we have here, actually it's a bit of both, information and a chart, talks about, there it is, stock has gained 31% over the last 8 days. 31% in 8 days. So if you're an investor that bought on the dips, I'm sure you would be very happy over the past week how Nvidia has done. And as I said, it will be a market mover. It's going to move tech stocks. It's going to move other chip makers. It's going to move the market as a whole, the S&P 500. So it's definitely an earnings report we're going to want to see after the market closes, I believe on the 28th, and definitely don't miss that. The third and final point I think individual investors should be focusing on are Canadian bank earnings. And as I mentioned, with, I guess, individual investors here in Canada, we own a lot of bank stocks, right? Bank stocks make up the largest component of the Toronto Stock Exchange. There are your top 6 banks, and they're all set to report, starting with TD and then BMO Scotia right after the following week. I have a couple of charts on 2 banks in particular here. TD Bank stock, which I've spoken about as a buying opportunity many times on this show, many times on my radio show. They've had a lot of issues with money laundering. There were some charges, an investigation still, I believe, being done. Stock got down to the low 70s. You can see it there in, I guess, in the month of June, 72, 73 in that range, and it has now gone up. I had a bit of a blip during the beginning of August, like everything else, and now it's back well above $80 a share. Dividends at one point were almost 6%. Now they're just around 5% because the stock has gone up. And again, TD Bank is a name that I think you can take a look at. Scotiabank is the second chart we have. Scotiabank will report earnings the following week, and they just made an acquisition, actually, but a stake, 15% stake in KeyCorp, a regional bank in the United States, paying a few $1 billion for it. I think it's a great opportunity. Scotiabank has talked about how they want to get more into the U.S. market, less in places like South America, Central America, but they want to get more into the U.S. market. Buying this regional bank, I think, was a great idea. Good for KeyCorp and good for Scotiabank exposure. But it's just an opportunity. I think when they announced the buy, stock went down because anytime companies announce a buy and they're spending money, I think the knee-jerk reaction is to sell the stock because they're spending money. But quickly, investors realized that was the wrong thing to do, and the stock has gone up again. Overall, I guess when you look at all the banks, you want to look at what they're going to say about loan loss provisions. You want to know if they're setting aside even more money for bad debt. Keep in mind, Individuals have to pay more for their mortgages, more for their loans, more for their credit cards. There's issues obviously in areas such as commercial real estate issues. With these interest rates as high as they are, yes, coming down, this is caused some issues for businesses, for individuals, and obviously the bank is feeling it and has felt it over the last bunch of quarters. So what's the bank going to say? How's the consumer faring? Are individuals still borrowing money? What's the situation with respect to loans? Are they growing their loan book? How's their wealth management divisions? All this, trading, all this is what we want to hear from the banks and what they say. Will any of them raise their dividends? If they do, it'd probably be very, very slightly. Will they buy back shares? All of this is what we're going to be listening for. And the good news is, with regards to Canadian banks, U.S. banks always go first, and they reported some really good earnings. So I'm hopeful that we're going to see some really good earnings out of the Canadian banks as well.